Jacob.
We are here with Matt McDonnell, who's the managing partner and co-founder of Stellify VC and the Geyser Group. Is that right?
Yeah, thanks for having
Yeah,
me.
yeah, absolutely. Thanks for joining today. Excited to have the conversation and dive into the unique work that you and the team are doing. So I know we just talked a little bit. You're down in Austin, correct?
Yep, yeah, based here in Austin, Texas.
Love it. Nice. I know some of those Saturdays are becoming a little bit crazier down there, especially now that Texas is getting into a little SEC play. They'll play my boys at the Red River here soon, which I'm pretty excited about. But that's not for
Yeah,
a couple weeks. So I am curious for those who may not know you, what's your personal journey been like from law school and teaching to real estate development and now into venture with Stellify and the Geyser Group.
yeah. So just the real quick story is that I grew up in Scranton, Pennsylvania, went to college, and really kind of continued with my love of outdoor education. And so for the first most of my 20s, I was working on sailboats and for Outward Bound specifically, doing character development and leadership training programs that use traditional tall ships as a delivery mechanism. They have a great way of leveling the playing field because nobody knows how to sail a boat with the same technology that was on it 150 years ago. And so, that experience, I think, really solidified something that I lean on a lot, which is, small groups of people in very dynamic and unpredictable environments trying to get from point A to point B. And that has always sort of resonated for me in my work with startups. So I didn't know it at the time, but I thought it was very good training. And eventually, I got sick of sleeping on a moldy pillow and not having a home base. And so I ended up in Charleston, South Carolina, working for a nonprofit that owned a boat, and it was a wonderful experience. But at a certain point, I felt like I needed to address a couple gaps in my education, and so I thought I'd go to law school. And then I think quite luckily in the interim, got an MBA with a focus in finance and really sort of discovered my passion and talents. And so I did that program at the College of Charleston and then came to UT to go to law school and almost immediately realized I didn't want to be a lawyer. And so I always say that going to law school is a heck of an education, but it wasn't a profession that I was interested in. And so I showed up with this entrepreneurial bug and I joined a startup within a couple months of getting to law school. First as an intern, and then worked my way up to being a COO and helping pretty aggressively with capital formation and sales and all of the other things that go along with running a early stage company that sold to enterprise clients. And then from there, one of my investors had a pretty big liquidity event, selling their company first to private equity and then to a public company. And so that family asked me to set up a family office for them. And so that was a great trial by fire, where I got exposed to a ton of different asset classes, but really sort of reconfirmed my interest in early stage venture. And then also really started to get some good exposure to commercial real estate. And so, you know, there was just sort of a progression from being an LP to then doing some projects on our own, to then forming the Geyser Group in partnership with that family office called Notley. And the Geyser Group has been mostly doing ground up development of multifamily and townhome projects as infill sites in Central Texas. So we're really, very housing oriented. Along the way, I kept being a pretty active angel investor, and I think one of the things that always just blew me away in the real estate world is how little technology was being deployed by folks that have been doing it for a long time. And so for me, the kind of journey to specifically being a real estate tech investor was driven by my own curiosity and desire to do things better, faster, cheaper within a development business. So that was really the start of it. And then Stellify was formed when I came together with my two partners there, who also owned real estate development or real estate businesses. They're value add investors in multifamily. They've deployed a number of funds, and they kind of have the same experiences, right? There's got to be a better way to do this. And so we started angel investing together probably about 10 years ago, and it's just sort of been a natural evolution into working together on this early stage venture firm where, we feel like we have a good way to differentiate ourselves because we really do understand the industry, we understand the customers, and I think because of that can be not just better investors, right? Picking companies that have the best opportunity to sell to those owners and operators, but I think also we can be helpful to those businesses by sort of short circuiting that learning experience that I think all prop tech founders have to go through selling to that type of customer.
No, totally. I think it's funny you said the piece about not wanting to become a lawyer. I was actually I had a podcast yesterday with one of the guys that was a participant, and he said the exact same thing. He said he went to law school, and within 10 days he knew he didn't want to be a lawyer. And it just seems like that's almost like like you said, like you can learn a lot. It's something that is something that you can kind of use maybe in certain ways in terms of your life, but like it seems like something about that is like once you get in there, it's like, well, maybe I don't know. And then for you, you were able to kind of do something on the side while you were, able to do that, which actually propelled your curiosity, propelled your interest in where you are today, has kind of propelled you into that world. Um, I think one of the things you mentioned also was like the real estate and technology piece. I mean, I know for me in my day to day, like it's been very recent that the technology wave has really started to take off in the real estate world. And there's still a lot of people that are lagging behind. And so, if you can get in there early and often and be able to, use what you feel like is going to be, ways to promote technology and back companies that are promoting and using technology, it's like you're going to be ahead of the curve in that industry.
Yeah, I will say one lesson that I've learned more times than I care to admit is being early is the same thing as being wrong. And so I think that, when you look at this prop tech market, that's sort of what happened, right? You had, I'm by no means the first person to think that there should be more technology in commercial real estate. And so you had a lot of kind of fits and starts, starting about 20 years ago, and even longer with some of the legacy systems like CoStar and Argus that they saw widespread adoption, but they had a somewhat limited scope, right? They were solving a particularly painful problem, but you didn't sort of see those new entrants. And so I think for me, really what I started to notice with particularly as we kind of came to the end of this last cycle, starting in the late 20 teens, was that, everybody knew money wasn't going to be free forever, or at least most people did. And when the real estate markets really slowed down, you sort of were faced with this option of, well, I can't do new projects, so I've become an asset manager, more or less. And I also have a lot of overhead. And so what you saw were a lot of these firms, waiting for natural attrition or making layoffs, but really asking themselves, well, if we really want to be competitive in the next part of the cycle, what do we need to do, right? What do we need to get better at? And, I think a lot of people learned really painful lessons about having too big of a team, right? So that when the market turns, you have to make a lot of painful decisions. And so I think you sort of ended up with this very interesting, a number of different catalysts for adoption of technology, all converging at the same time. But I think maybe most importantly, at a time where you had an opportunity to think about it. Between 2010 and 2020, let's say, everybody was just blowing and going and buying deals, and rising tides raised all boats, right? And I think when the tide went out, some people found out that they weren't wearing a bathing suit and wanted to address some of the shortcomings in either their acquisition process or asset management or what have you, but again, they had the time to do it. And so we've really been a beneficiary of that with a first fund that was a 2022 vintage, and we saw that too in some of the angel investments that we made, sort of across the board.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, I think I think to your point, it's like it did all kind of converge at once, but it was for different reasons in terms of the technology boom. It's like some people were, if you were ahead of it, other people weren't as quick to pick it up, and so you were kind of lagging behind. But also in the same time, people realized that they are almost backed into a corner of having to do it at some point. So then you have the people who were lagging behind finally catching up, and it's just kind of just in this combustion of, now if you're not doing it, you're doing something wrong kind of thing.
Yeah,
Um,
that's right.
yeah,
And
so
the
it's been
products,
interesting.
oh, sorry. The products got
Yeah.
better too, right? I think you had more products to solve more challenges. And I think that was, it wasn't just, hey, there's, 2 dozen products out there, right, that are going to make everybody's life easier. It was, well, actually, we really have to pay attention to this because now there's thousands of them with 10 or 20 of them solving, each of these problems that we face in our business. And so you kind of had to become a buyer of technology vendors, right, in a way that you hadn't before. And I think that just spurred a lot more thinking about, how people could continue to deploy technology and, maybe in ways that they weren't thinking about ahead of time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I always like, I always find it interesting of like, people have to adapt to things that maybe the whole if it ain't broke, don't fix it mentality for a lot of people. I know in the real estate world has just been there forever. And eventually it is broke and you do have to fix it. And so you have to adapt to the times, or, you're going to have competitors and then it's kind of like, well, where does that leave us in the scheme of things? So, and that's not even just this industry. I just feel like the real estate industry has just been slow to adapt technology more so than, maybe some other ones, at least in my experience. I am curious. I know you had mentioned, sort of the Stellify umbrella, or like the different branches that have kind of branched off in terms of two companies that you've been vocal about are Residesk and Lenny. Is that how you pronounce those?
Yeah, that's right.
So, for listeners that are unfamiliar, I mean, what problems are they solving in the multifamily world?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So I think starting with Residesk, their founding story is interesting because you have, commercial real estate's the world's largest asset class, but much, much bigger than public equities even. And so what dawned on those founders was, hey, there's no consumer data set about this giant chunk of consumers that we call renters, right? So nobody knows what they want. Nobody knows what their complaints are, right? Unless it somehow gets back to a property manager. And so the idea was, well, we'll be able to develop insights from this customer data set. And the realization early on in that business was the data set doesn't exist. So we need to build a product or a technology that allows those users to communicate their concerns, their needs, so on and so forth. And so what they built initially is a tenant communication platform that occurs through SMS, that's AI driven, but with a human in the loop. And that's allowed them on any given portfolio to build a really, exceptional data set on what's happening within property, right? So if you own, say 100 multifamily properties all over the country, you can really start to zero in on which buildings have which challenges, right, that need to be addressed. And that translates into higher tenant satisfaction. The tenants are much more likely to renew. Turnovers are just an enormous cost in that industry. But you can also delight those tenants, right? And so you've seen, similar strategies deployed by other companies. But I think that, really, if you think about a renter, right, who's maybe on average 25 years old and is used to texting to get answers to their questions, right, you sort of had to meet that user where they were. And then all of that information gets written back into the property management system, into the accounting system, into your maintenance management system. So now broken light bulbs are out less, right? You can get to it faster. And so really just sort of short circuiting anything that the tenant experiences in order to have a much faster delivery of an experience that they would like. So that was sort of the challenge that they solved. And over time, as they've penetrated customers more deeply, you become aware of other challenges, right? So automated leasing, showings of units so that you don't end up just confined to the hours that your leasing office is open, right? There's sort of once you have that relationship and that trust with a tenant, you start to have a lot more other opportunities to serve them and to improve the operations of the building. But again, at the end of the day, they're also building a real data set on this giant consumer segment that to date hasn't been digitalized as a data set.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I can single-handedly attest to, most renters these days, they don't want to have to talk to anybody. They just want you to be able to communicate with them digitally. They want to do everything digitally. And like you said, SMS is a lot quicker of a way to get to it than having them go onto their portal, go like, fill something out, put in a maintenance request, things like that. So getting in front of it in that sense and be able to, keep that data set and actually keep it forever, moving forward is light years ahead of what most people do on property.
Yeah, well, and it gives you insight into, which regional property managers have the fewest complaints, right? It allows you to evaluate what's going well on your team, where there are opportunities for further education, right? Without it sort of being a surveillance product, right? Which I think is something that has not really worked well in the real estate industry. And then the other one that you asked about is Lenny. And so something you said earlier struck me, which is that the other side of the coin of an industry that maybe has historically been slow to adopt change is that you can't actually sell to that industry without fitting into their existing workflows. And I'd say that that's maybe the biggest thing that I have spent my time coaching early stage founders on is look, you're not gonna if your idea is to just totally disrupt an industry, well, you have to start by getting a toehold in making something that those customers are doing better, faster, and cheaper. And so, what does every real estate firm do? They have a mountain of data that comes from disparate data sources, and they're building a ton of Excel spreadsheets. So, if you said, hey, I want to know what my forward 12-month NOI is going to look like on the southeast region of our multifamily portfolio, you're going to have a meeting with an analyst. You're going to ask
Yep.
that analyst a bunch of questions. And so what Lenny did, which I think is quite smart, is they created a universal data model so that all of this disparate data, so whether you're consuming APIs from your PMS, like a RealPage or an AppFolio or a Yardi, or you have your own proprietary data, like a mountain of spreadsheets that you've been keeping for decades, it can ingest all of that information into one unified data model. And then with an agent, you can query it and get all sorts of information that would have formerly taken you hours and hours and hours. And again, having more headcount, right? And so I think that was really the problem. And that dovetails nicely with what we were talking about when the real estate market slowed down, right? Nobody wants to have bloated payrolls, right? But these are very, very manual tasks until you had a really good solution. And what I think is sort of the thing that has allowed Lenny to get such fast adoption from really blue chip multifamily operators is they understood the problem, they came from that industry, and they're able to break down those silos, right? In a way that hadn't really been possible before, while also not hindering that operator or owner's ability to do things their own way, right? To have their own proprietary data, right? Or their own way to make decisions. And so, I think they're a particularly good example of, sure, everybody wants innovation, but you can't also adopt new software and take on some impossibly large change management task, right? They're not asking you to spend, 70 days with an IT person and change your PMS, right? It's again, it's that idea of meet your customers where they are, right, and provide a really useful solution. And then you have all sorts of other opportunities, like going into other verticals within the real estate industry, or going into other asset classes like private equity, venture, alternative credit, right? A lot of the core technology works really well for, for other industries, and they haven't, quite gotten there yet. They're very focused on the opportunity in front of them, but I think the strategy is one that other companies should consider emulating.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I feel like they're going to do very well. I don't know how long these have both been around. I know I was talking about the other day that I had heard of ResiDesk, but I had not heard of Lenny. And I don't know if is that something that's been around for a few years now, or is that relatively new?
Yeah, so Lenny's about 24 months in.
Okay.
So we invested as their one of their seed investors with one other VC firm. They had raised a little bit of capital in their pre-seed, and then they mostly focused on product development and sales, like you would imagine, early stage. And so by really getting that product right, that's the thing that has spurred adoption, right? They weren't asking somebody to use something that wasn't feature complete, right? It's a potentially a risky strategy for certain businesses, but they did so well executing on the product that people are just delighted when they use it, right? Which is also a fairly rare outcome for prop tech. And then Resi
Yeah.
has been around a little bit longer, but
Yeah.
pretty similar story, right? That's a fairly robust product that you've got to build and have it work flawlessly, and communicate with the rest of the technology ecosystem or tech stack that an owner and operator has. And so, again, sort of a heavy upfront development lift. That team had two technical co-founders, which was, I think, necessary for their progress. But yeah, I mean, you're seeing this adoption in both of those businesses to, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of multifamily units over just a couple short years. And again, I think it's that the product solves a real problem without, a huge hassle of an integration or needing an organization to go through a change management process.
100% agree. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like, those I hesitate to even say disruptors in the industry, but just come in and, I could see both of those being game changers in this, quite honestly, just based on the conversations that I have on a daily basis about where people feel like there's gaps in terms of, from all the way from acquisitions to, long-term holds, things like that. It's like there are significant gaps, and a lot of it has to do with just what you mentioned, that what these kind of come in and help to bridge the gap there. And most companies say they're using AI, but I know you've mentioned and emphasized, for these at least being AI native by virtue of Stellify's timing.
Yeah.
What would you say are the real advantages of being AI native versus layering it in later?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think a couple of things. I think that the workflows are very different, right? So part of that is if you want to meet that customer's expectation for how they interact with technology, you're compared, they leave their computer where they've been talking to Chat GPT, or they
Yeah.
bought something on e-commerce and now they're talking with an agent, at that e-commerce company, right? So you have that experience, right? And if you tried to build a, sort of more SaaS-based first product iteration, right, or first MVP, I think that, you risk people either getting turned off or just not having kind of the same passion or conviction about using it at first. And I think the other thing that's happened, which is gets discounted a lot, are these RAG models, right? So while both of those companies employ really, really deep technology and it's proprietary, that you also have the ability as a prop tech company to, if you have a database that can be queried, right? There's a lot of modules that you can pull off the shelf that sort of give the feel of a truly AI native product, right? Without, asking customers to to have that clunky experience, or without having to overinvest in development until you've found product market fit, right? So those couple companies that we've been talking about, I think they had such a clear understanding of the product they were trying to solve that they had the confidence and the conviction to go develop, full functionality products. But if you're making that pivot, right, and you weren't lucky enough to start in, between 2022 and 2025, and you need to deal with some legacy technology, there are some really good shortcuts, right, that still give that customer that experience without having to, shut your product down or build something new entirely, right? Hopefully you have a pretty significant database that you can then start querying with, before you have to invest millions of dollars in product development.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. No, I love that answer. I mean, I think it's such a unique time right now, and a lot of these AI native products, once they kind of get their feet under them and people start realizing the potential, and especially that, it's not necessarily oh, I want this, but oh, I need this kind of a thing. I mean, that's when there's this endless opportunity. And I think that time's coming sooner rather than later.
Yeah,
Um,
well, from an investment perspective, right, that's functionally infinite gross margin on your product.
mhm.
So every new customer, and that's really where I think the VC community has been, is that your growth can be a lot faster. You're seeing margin compression in SaaS, right, and other products like that. And you also have the ability to do, effectively mass customization with your existing product, depending on the user's needs or queries that they're sending you. And so, I think that's really, I think from a funding environment, if you don't have a business that has that kind of a margin and that kind of ability to scale very, very quickly, then you're way less likely to be able to attract investment. And so, if you do have one of those legacy products, I think we're also seeing very good companies out in the market that have been around for 7 to 10 years, but have retooled their products to be able to take advantage. Not of, this is not some passing trend, right? This is the new world order, and a moment in human history that's sort of unlike any other efficiency gain that I can think of. And so I think that's really kind of, from a capital markets perspective, what the capital markets are demanding, right, is take advantage of this as opposed to, getting left behind.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, it's almost like the internet age. When the Y2K happened and, everything became internet based, it was either you either are, this is here to stay for one. This isn't something that's going away. And I think that's all, this may even be as big or bigger than that, where you look back in 5 years and if companies aren't either, mostly AI driven in the product that they're selling, or at least incorporating a bunch of, AI types of systems and processes in their own day to day, they're going to be they're not going to survive because they're just going to be passed by, by all these companies that are, even the ones that, like you said, I mean, 6 7 years ago they saw a vision, they saw maybe a market gap or a product need, but now they're having to retool their product suite, and they realize that if they don't do that, they're probably not going to survive. And I think that's where things are heading pretty quickly.
Yeah,
um
well, at the end of the day, it's a productivity issue, right? I mean, that's really the value of AI. When you look at real productivity in, say, North America, and you look at all of the different industries, construction and real estate haven't seen the productivity gains that you've seen in all of the other industries.
yep.
And AI is really the thing that is going to unlock it for, of course, for all of the industries. But it's an analogy I like, with these AI native products is if you look at what happened in Africa with telecommunications, right? That continent, by and large, skipped right over landlines and went straight to a mobile infrastructure. And I think you're
Hmm.
very similar in the construction and real estate space, where we're skipping over a lot of the SaaS growing pains of the last 30 or 40 years and jumping right into a new paradigm that that I think is going to bode really well for future productivity.
Yeah, 100% agree. Um, so as someone that's running your own, development business alongside VC, I mean, what have been your biggest operational lessons in keeping both sides flowing smoothly, you would say?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, I think that we talk about this a lot, right? Because all of the partners at Stellify run real estate businesses, and I think that while it's challenging for sure, and time consuming, I think it does a couple of things, right? One is it really is a forcing function for you to eat your own dog food, so to speak, right? In terms of the technology that you're investing in, because you're looking for these productivity gains. And then from a sales perspective, right, you are very much more acquainted with the visceral pains, right? Like if I wasn't actively engaged in investing in and developing real estate, I'd be relying on my understanding of the market from some number of years ago. And I think that maintaining that kind of current edge in both of those industries, while it's been a real challenge, I think the lesson has been that it's been very effective. And I've personally come to the conclusion that I don't think I could be as good of a real estate developer or as good of a prop tech investor without doing both simultaneously. And
Yeah.
there are a lot of efficiencies, right, that you gain from it. And then I think the other operational lesson that I've gotten is that those capital markets are very, very different, but there is some overlap, right? So as you're helping companies raise subsequent rounds of financing and speaking to those investors, right, there's some overlap between what's going on there and what's happening in the real estate markets. And so as a capital markets person at my core, right? I think that's sort of the core thing that both of those industries are engaged in. You get a lot smarter, right, about allocation of capital and time and where the resources and the opportunities are, because you just have sort of a broader network of feedback than if you did any one of those industries alone. And so I think it's been helpful to sort of spot those trends, where I do think there's, I don't want to say it's a lesson per se, but a real opportunity is that a lot of this software and a lot of the professionals in real estate tend to gravitate towards construction or development or operations. And I think that one of the big waves that we're going to see over the next couple of years is marrying those two tech stacks and those two practices, right? So as an example, when you deliver a multifamily building and then you move into operations, well, there's no way to transition that data, right? So you don't have SKUs for all of the appliances in those units, right? You don't have the construction maintenance or the construction history to feed into your new maintenance history. And so I think that, and even just passing off operations for, the first 70 units that you deliver in phase 1 of 5, right? You're still having to go through this very manual transition period, even if you have really efficient technology to go manage the operations on a go forward basis. And so I think you're going to start to see a much tighter marriage of that, in the same way that you see hardware design being much more tightly mirrored with, firmware, software, and
Yep.
middleware, and ultimately the applications that run on those products.
No, absolutely. Yeah. I think you're spot on. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your podcast?
Yeah, thank you. So it's called Navigating Complexity. So the idea really came, so we talked a little bit about teaching, which I find is the way that I learn the most. And it's just something that I enjoy doing. And so have been teaching at a business school, and a number of students over the years, some number every year, kept asking, well, hey, I want to do X, Y, or Z, and I don't really know how to go from point A to point B. And so what I realized was that the traditional entrepreneur blueprints out there, right, is some genius who drops out of a good college and invents something that changes the world in their garage or in their bedroom while they're up late coding at night, and then boom, you're a billion in a couple of years, right? Well, my friends and my peers that are serial entrepreneurs, that's not their story, right? It's a lot less of a straight line. And so what I realized is that the things that make some people successful relative to others is that they have an ability or have figured out how to navigate these really complex and challenging environments. And most of the time it's personal, right? It has to do with your values, your desires, your grit or determination. But it's anything but the traditional linear story that you would read in business publications. And so after stumbling through a bunch of bad answers to these students for a long time, I basically thought, well, why don't I just go interview, a bunch of people that have had these experiences and really get into the nitty gritty of how and why they made the decisions that in hindsight really, change the trajectory of their lives or their careers or their families. And so those are the stories that we're trying to capture. And, obviously I lean a little bit more into the industries that I know well. But, at least the first season that's now out, covers a range of professions from architecture to owning your own hair salon to launching an experiential education and entrepreneurship oriented elementary school and everything in between.
Yeah, man, that definitely sounds unique for one. I think that there's great opportunity there just for kind of a unique perspective on all of these things. And I would definitely love to listen. Where can we find the podcast?
You can find it anywhere that you listen to your podcasts. So we syndicate it, but Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, any syndicated across all platforms.
Yeah, and it's navigating complexity for our listeners here. Well, awesome, Matt. Really appreciate you joining us here. Again, it's stellifyvc.com. Is that right?
That's right.
The website. Yep. Go check him out. Definitely go listen to his podcast, and we really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Love what you're doing here, and yeah, anytime I can help, let me know.
Absolutely.